Hello and welcome to Hot Topics on the Edge of Show. I'm Josh Krieger here with my co-host January Jones, and today we're welcoming a very special guest, Kate Bergman of Wolf Financial. Thanks for joining us, Kate.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to get into it.
Coming up, a Bitcoin high on Pizza Day, and the Genius Act is getting closer to happening. We'll also talk about MasterCard going crypto and get into some of the details about what's happening with Cade and Wolf Financial.
This is another production of Edge of Company, a rapidly growing media ecosystem empowering the pioneers in Web3, tech, culture, and innovation. Let's get started, January.
We are recording this on May 22nd, which in crypto circles is Bitcoin Pizza Day. Back in 2010, a Bitcoin developer paid 10,000 BTC for two Papa John's pizzas. It was the first real world purchase with Bitcoin. And today, on this sacred Pizza Day, Bitcoin has reached its all time high of $111,000, meaning those pizzas would now cost $1.1 billion.
Oh,
Uh, so this also means that in the same time, Bitcoin has overtaken Amazon in market capitalization, hitting 2.2 trillion. Okay, Josh, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I'm in Puerto Rico this week, San Juan, and I was really excited to find the local Bitcoin Pizza Day action. So after the show and getting a little bit more work done, I'll be heading over to hang out with some real OGs in the space that I think it's going to be really satisfying and emotional to see their reactions. The timing, it couldn't be more serendipitous in terms of this fun day. Except it doesn't exactly work with my diet, but I will be making an exception for this particular Bitcoin Pizza Day because there's a lot to celebrate, and I hear the pizza on in San Juan is pretty awesome. So Papa John's isn't my style. I think we'll probably have a local pizza company doing its magic for us. On a broader level, Kate, curious what your thoughts are, but we've been in this sort of sideways action for longer than I think a lot of us anticipated. However, there were sort of indications that June, July could be warm months for the cryptocurrency industry. The tariff stuff seems to be sort of shaking off, and in some cases, some of those policies have become more lenient. The macro conditions are improving. I think things are set up really nicely for at least the middle of the year. What do you think?
yeah, I would say it's been a wild cycle. We've had a lot of spaces where we talked to all these traders, we talked to a lot of Bitcoiners as well, and just getting their general thoughts on everything. And they've gone from predicting and trying to make predictions to we all just throw our hands in the air. We're like, okay, you know what? We can't predict these markets anymore. Everything feels like it's changing. The 4-year cycle's called into question. Of course, we won't know until it plays out whether or not it's going to continue. But people are like, okay, we're in a reactionary market here. A lot of the traders have moved into scalping, but the Bitcoiners are ever bullish as they always are. And I do think we're going to have a pretty electrifying year. I mean, we just shot to all-time highs on Bitcoin Pizza Day, which is pretty crazy. I mean, Bitcoin's at like 111, 112K or something like that. And it's funny, in January, I did not know. I should have known, but I didn't realize the guy who had bought those pizzas was a Bitcoin developer and miner himself. I thought he was just some guy who just had Bitcoin. That makes the story less painful, actually. And I wonder if that was like a partial, like that must have been something that he was like way more cool with doing at the time, because he's like, okay, theoretically these could be worth a ton of money, but we need to generate some real world application of this thing. I got to actually pay for these things. So in his head, even though looking back, he's like, wow, that was $1 billion, mistake in quotes. It's possible that also that story transcending. I mean, I've heard that story 1,000 times. It's pretty famous in the Bitcoin world. Obviously, there's a day for it. But I wonder if, like, he looks back and there's actually just no regret at all. He's just like, yeah, that's what it was. Like that.
He doesn't have regrets. Yeah, he's talked about it multiple times. And I mean, he basically created the holiday for crypto, right? This is like crypto's Christmas is Bitcoin Pizza Day, right?
It does, Kate. Your commentary does sort of bring up another thought in my mind, which is around sort of Bitcoin maxis spending their crypto, their Bitcoin, I remember a conversation with a Bitcoin payment wallet that said that historically they've seen that they get a lot more activity, a lot more transactions, conversions, commerce after Bitcoin crosses 100K, and that they were anticipating if the Bitcoin maxis see a consistent trend above 100, we may get more sort of spending and transactional volume with Bitcoin. I'm sure there's some that are just going to hodl to it gets to their perceived million, which is what they're hoping for. But I have to think that this might inject some more economic sort of stimulus at this time in the market where people haven't been spending as much money across the globe. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, we've had a lot of Bitcoin spaces where we have a lot of the maxis who come on who are mainly the hodlers. I'm not exactly sure their financial holdings, and I'm sure they've got a good amount of Bitcoin. That's probably why that is their main mentality, to just buy and hold this asset. And some of them are big in the Bitcoin standard, where they're like, we're going to have a Bitcoin world where your 0.3 Bitcoin is more important than the US dollar valuation of 0.3 Bitcoin. You got to think about it like that. And then there's other people who are, like we had a guy, Olu, who came on, and he was, he has a couple banks going on in Nigeria, and he was like way more of a proponent of spending and using your Bitcoin. It's just a different environment over there. He was like, yeah, he's like, we can't save our dollars in our currency because it's so volatile, and it's not exactly as promising as Bitcoin's future in a lot of ways. So a lot of people use Bitcoin and they use Lightning Network or whatever it is. But I think over here in the West, in the States, it's a lot more of the mentality of buy, hold this asset. This is the diamond of diamonds. This thing is very finite. It's so crazy because at first principles of Bitcoin, for me, it always goes back to the 21 million and the finite supply. It just sets Bitcoin apart. Like I was saying before the show, it's the only asset I'm in constant fear of, where I struggle to sleep at night unless I have a healthy amount of Bitcoin in the portfolio, because it's the only asset where if it flies, there's a finite supply. And everything else, for the most part, there can be more created. There can be stock splits. There can be, things that can happen. But as far as spending your Bitcoin, I'm not a huge fan of it yet. And maybe it's just a step in my journey where I start to get to a point where I'm like, yeah, I want to spend some of it, use some of it. And maybe it's just two different piles. One's your hodl bag, your retirement bag, and then one's something that you mess around and play with, just like people have with Solana or crypto.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. There'll probably be new conversations around sort of spend versus hodl diversification in the Bitcoin community. So we can look forward to ever evolving conversations, but more and more times in the mainstream narrative where Bitcoin's mentioned now that sort of we've crossed this major milestone. What else do you have, January?
Well, just some of the biggest news ever to hit the United States. The Senate just advanced the Genius Act, the first federal framework for regulating stablecoins, with a bipartisan 66-32 vote, overcoming a filibuster in record time. Key to winning Democratic support was an amendment adding more consumer protections, limits on tech companies issuing stablecoins, and expanded ethic rules temporarily covering Elon Musk and David Sachs. This bill aims to bring regulatory clarity and standards to the $230 billion stablecoin market, and moving at a speed usually reserved for crisis legislation like COVID or 9/11. Cade, you run a lot of spaces, as you've mentioned. What is crypto Twitter saying about the Genius Act right now?
Yeah, so this came up. It was definitely a hot topic. And it's interesting because I think the word stablecoin for a lot of people in the Bitcoin world gets people antsy and nervous because they're like, oh, it's so close to the CBDC concept, which a lot of people are nervous about because it feels like an Orwellian future we're headed if that's the case, and people are now pegged to this thing that is ultimately not in their hands, and they're like, hey, you said a bad thing, you can't go into the grocery store today. Like, hey, you may not travel. And because you've gotten to the point where you are now dependent on the CBDC, people are just very wary of that topic. However, stablecoins are a bit of a different story, and there's been way more of a conversation this year than I ever expected. I mean, I watched 3 separate podcasts on just stablecoins. And I was like, what am I doing, dude? 3 years ago, I would have been like, what are you doing? You got to buy the next coin that's going to go to the moon. And now that you're learning about a coin that's supposed to stay at zero and serve a different function in the world. But it's really interesting because I'm glad that they're trying to get some regulatory framework here for stable coins and just clarity across the board in crypto, which a lot of people wanted. I think people were nervous, especially people like Elizabeth Warren, who people, make lots of memes about, but people who are pretty ardently against it. I'm like, don't you want some clarity though? Like, or you just, I think their mentality is we don't want any of it, just get it out of the room, get it out of the room. But I'm like, okay, well, the next best thing is to get a little bit of clarity. It's not like they're saying, well, I guess we did have a Trump meme coin, but that's not exactly what these are for. They're trying to figure out ways to actually have something good come to this. And I know they want to maintain a balance of 1-to-1 with the US dollar and other liquid assets, which should help with some stability and some confidence for people who are looking to get in. But also, like, a majority of stable coins are pegged to the US dollar. So this kind of thing should be across the board a happy thing for a lot of people. And I think that's probably why it got passed with a pretty overwhelming majority, because it's like, it's good for the dollar. Like, these are pegged to the US dollar, which is our own currency.
Yeah. I echo a lot of your thoughts, Cade, and I think it's a very exciting time and strong indicator of the progress of legislation that's in favor of crypto. Sort of, I'm not sure too many people would have predicted this would have happened. I remember the doomsday type of conversations 2-3 years ago around sort of the potential downfall of stable coins at some point in the future, and not knowing if any stable coins are actually going to be stable. I think that it's going to be really interesting to see how banks respond to this legislation. I think we can see a lot more stable coins coming through that channel, as well as gaming channels and whatnot. I personally I respect the conservative approach to large tech giants and what they could do with their own stable coins and putting some bumpers on things there. I think that's actually very reasonable. We've seen sort of over the last 20 years the power of sort of Apple and Microsoft and Google, and to dominate whole industries, to create whole industries in ways that are not available to any other companies. So I think, as long as sort of, I'm not too familiar with all the details of this legislation, but if it stimulates competition in a healthy way, I think that's what this is all about. I'm not sure at the end of the day how many stable coins are going to be left standing. I think, there's Tether and USDC has a huge head start. It's going to be difficult for other folks to sort of get to that level of network effect. At the same time, I think overall, I think it's going to create a lot of innovation and creativity in the space, and support sort of a very interesting year ahead.
Definitely.
Well, the pace that it's moving at, is remarkable in itself. And I think it kind of got overhyped in the political cycles that the Democrats were holding it back. Because look, hardly anything's ever moved in 3 weeks. Are you kidding me? Like, this is going very fast, but it is good to have these discussions because, people in the crypto space have seen the worst case scenarios, right? And a lot of those is what the mainstream country and the media is going to cover in the past. And so seeing these precautions, and also part of the stablecoin bill does talk about not having elected officials holding or creating, coins while they're in office. There are restrictions trying to build in around that, right? Because we've seen what's already happened up to now. And so I think that I think it will go through, and it's going to go through really fast, but it's good to see everybody like getting on board and trying to just make it as positive across the board, so that we can enact these policies and have these companies really be operating with clear legal rules that protects everyone, that it protects investors, and it also protects consumers who want to get involved and don't want to have to go through the buyer beware part of crypto that everyone in the space has already experienced to date. So, speaking of that, MasterCard is going crypto. So, MasterCard is making major moves with crypto partnerships. They've joined up with MoonPay for a stablecoin powered card and with Gemini to roll out a Bitcoin credit card that gives you 4% back in Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies instantly on your purchases. So, do we really need crypto for everyday purchases and having MasterCard in the game? Isn't that who everyone was trying to get away from in the financial sense?
Yeah, there was I agree. So when I first seen the announcements, I actually did a pulse check and ran through the comments, and I was like, okay, what are some of the people that I respect saying about this? Because I remember when a few years ago, Gemini went through some stuff, and people were like, okay, there's a bit of trust factor that has been toppled a little bit, and but they've done a great job since. I saw Michael Saylor was like, I want one of these orange cards. I saw James Seyfarth from Bloomberg had also tweeted at them and said, this is a really interesting concept. Went and did some research and found, yeah, like you get 4% back in your Bitcoin for certain things like Ubers and some transport stuff. It's a little bit less, depending on what you're buying, like groceries. I think it's a 3% or 2%. And then there's definitely 1% for everything else, which is just a reason to get it if you want to just get free Bitcoin back essentially and have a bright orange credit card. And so I was like, okay, like that's interesting. So I applied, I got one. We'll see how it goes. For me, I was less interested in like the whole bringing crypto into the world. I was mainly just because I was like, this is just an opportunity for people to get more Bitcoin and not have to think about it so much and just have a normal credit card. It's just a normal MasterCard. And so from that side of things, I think it's cool. What I've noticed in the last like year, I guess, has been that like, people are way more open to Bitcoin or way more open to crypto. The good thing about Bitcoin is that the more you do research on it, the more generally the happy you are with the product. You're like, okay, yeah, this is what it says it is. This thing is truly different than anything else we have in terms of assets. And crypto, there's all sorts of things that are going on. There's some cool things. There's also a bunch of craziness out there. But with Bitcoin, it's cool because you're like, okay, people get introduced to this, and maybe the price goes down. That's really as bad as it gets because everything else for Bitcoin is a good thing. And over the course of 10, 15 years, I think it will probably be the best performing asset ever. And so for me, I'm like, this is cool. It's such an easy way to get people onboarded. They don't have to think too much. There's not like this onboarding process. They just like get Bitcoin back. And then hopefully they do a bit of research when the money goes up. And for me, when that first happened, it was for just random altcoins. It was for some meme coins. And when I did the research, I was like, okay, well, I'm happy money went up. I'll take that all day. But there wasn't anything past that I was that excited about. But it led me into the world of crypto and ultimately Bitcoin, which I was very happy with.
Yeah, I think it's great. Typically, what's become the norm for points and reward programs with credit cards is the terms change and you get less rewards for the same amount of spending, or there's a promotional period, and then once that's over, you're wondering whether or not the annual fee is worth it, right? 4% sort of return in Bitcoin is quite healthy. You got to figure most people got to spend at least, $20,000 on credit cards a year at a minimum. So, this is a meaningful amount of potential asset value accumulation of a new asset class that people may not have had in their portfolio. It's equivalent to, fractional real estate rewards for buying on a credit card. I mean, it's going to be totally new to someone who hasn't picked up any Bitcoin yet. And I think it's going to create some virality when you're talking to your friend and they redeem their points for an airline miles or a reserve, and you have enough points to sort of put a down payment on a house because it was in Bitcoin, and it does go up. So it has been the best performing asset historically the last 10 years, and I think that trend will continue. And it's programs like this that have a lot of interesting ancillary benefits for the Bitcoin economic landscape. So I think it's a big move. I'm bullish on it. I haven't gotten mine yet, but I'll probably be picking up one as well. Though I do like my platinum Amex points as well.
Oh yeah, me too.
So it's going to be a little bit of a balancing act there. I think they'll probably, those lounges internationally at least are pretty important with all the international travel I do. So hopefully there'll be someone that's going to do like a lounge sort of Amex style points program and Bitcoin at the same time. And you know, I'm probably their target audience for that.
Yeah, there was we had one of the guys in our Bitcoin spaces, really smart guy, Dark Side. He talked about it, like blew my mind. I don't know why it blew my mind, but the way he put it, I guess, was just not the way I was thinking about Bitcoin, which I hope this is one of like the byproducts from this new story from Gemini with their credit card. But he was like, you know, he goes, for the people who are like, Bitcoin's just too volatile, it just is too volatile. He goes, it's not. He goes, zero point 0.1 Bitcoin is 0.1 Bitcoin. He goes, that is just facts. So if you are at a point where you've accumulated 0.1 Bitcoin from these credit card transactions, maybe, and you're letting it sit there and you almost don't have the dollar amount pulled up, he goes, it's really not volatile at all. He goes, it just sits there at 0.1 Bitcoin. He goes, it's just expensive because it's a finite supply. And hopefully for these people, they get their Bitcoin, they just let it sit there, and they're like, oh, it's just one of these rewards I get, just like any other credit card, like you're saying, 4%, whatever back, where it kind of just accumulates in the points in the back end of the card. But hopefully, you know, I'm not exactly sure how it's going to be set up, but you just grow the small little Bitcoin portfolio. Hopefully let it sit there, or maybe you move it to your other Bitcoin wallet or something like that. I'm not sure how it's going to work, but I'm hoping that it just kind of accumulates and people, as much as they can just focus on that BTC and the Satoshi that they have rather than the dollar, because that for me really helped unlock the longer term mindset, I think, of this asset, which, I mean, it's going to be impossible. If this thing goes to 1 million, then that means you're going to have to sit through 200K, 300K, 400K, and you're going to have to somehow be able to, you know, withhold the pressure not to sell. And it just depends on your mindset and your life situation, of course. But
yeah, totally agree, Cade. And I think it's really interesting to think about the potential if Bitcoin does get to 200, 300, 400, even a million. We're dealing with a 10x return on your rewards at that point, which could be life changing for some individuals. So kudos to MasterCard for sort of being a pioneer in this area. And Cade, you know, thank you for joining us on Hot Topics. I know you do tons of content, and appreciate you saving those vocal cords for a little bit more content with us. If folks want to learn more about Wolf Financial and what you guys are up to, how do they dive down the rabbit hole?
yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me, January and Josh. This is fun. And yeah, for finding us at Wolf, we just basically, we're a Spaces company. We do streams and stuff as well, and podcasts and such, but Spaces are our bread and butter, which are on X or Twitter, formerly known as Twitter. And they're like similar to this audio format. And it's hard because if you're not in the Spaces world, you're like, audio format, I don't know, that seems like kind of old, like radio. It's kind of similar to radio, but it's like a panel of people that come on. We have some speakers, just like we have right now, people on the stage who are just going back and forth, speaking live with each other. And then there's an audience, people who are just tuning in. They're like, oh, there's all these different Spaces shows I can choose from. I know this guy, I know this girl, I like these people. I want to hear what they're talking about. They're talking about, you know, MSTY versus Bitcoin. Cool. I'll click that. And you jump into a live conversation, and you have the opportunity to click the request button and jump up on live. And now you're talking to, like, I don't know, someone random. You're like, oh, Eric Weinstein. You're like, now I'm talking to Eric Weinstein on stage. And that's happened before to people. And so that's the coolest part about Spaces. But you can find us at Wolf Financial if you're more in the stock world, traditional finance. And then I'm the host for Wolf Crypto. So anything Bitcoin and crypto related, we host shows anywhere from 15 to 40 hours a week across our channels, depending on which one you go to. And we're talking about all things going on, trading, Bitcoin, the RWA markets, the crypto market as a whole. And so we talk about all the things. So definitely check us out on X if that is something that you're into, and try and keep up to date with everything that's going on.
Absolutely. That's a lot of content. That's a lot of talking. So, you know, I know when I go to these conferences and do back-to-back interviews, 15 to 20 some 2 days in a row, my vocal cords are strained. I'm really curious. We'll have to talk offline about your techniques to save those vocal cords, but definitely encourage folks to check out what you guys do on X. And that wraps up today's episode of the Edge of Show. We covered a Bitcoin high on Pizza Day, the Genie Center getting closer to happening, MasterCard getting into crypto, and learned a little bit more about what Cade's doing over at Wolf Financial. So join the conversation on social. Let us know, because the edge of crypto and AI is where the action is.
Thanks for joining us as we navigated the latest and greatest in Web3. I'm January here with Josh. Stay curious, keep pushing boundaries, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss what's next on the Edge of Show.